Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Ajay.
Good evening, Lavanya. Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the show Exploring Automation. Today we are doing our seventh episode. Ajay, what are we going to talk about today?
Um, I was thinking of automation and then, exploring automation. So, automation is considered something as one huge ocean. It is at the same time, right? And people struggle to break it down so that they can focus on one part and then move to maybe the next level. Right? So then I was thinking, what are the knowledge levels in automation? So maybe we could discuss that. The different knowledge levels. Is there a hierarchy of levels in knowing automation? Right?
Yes,
Something on those lines.
that sounds good. So, you have any ideas of what you think would be knowledge levels?
Okay, something on maybe read code to start with, and then write code, which could include maintain the existing scripts or write new scripts. Right? And then maybe we can go to maintaining a framework and then creating a framework. While these are, I'm not sure if these are enough or this is a good classification of the different levels, but at least we can get started with this and then maybe discuss on if people are at different levels within these levels, how do they get started or how do they progress to the next level?
All right. I think I would also want to add, like, maybe at the start, one level could just be setting up your machine and running tests. It sounds very basic, but those also, that there is quite a bit of learning even there. So maybe that could also be like a first step. Then we could move on to, yeah, reading, fixing, writing, and so on.
And many people do struggle, including me, to even set up those the environments, the first the prerequisites, for example, or there are so many other variables involved here that the chances of mistakes are also more. But then that's the way to learn them, right? That's the way to know what is dependent on what other parameters and how do we proceed with even before writing the code, ensure that the environment is configured. So I think setting up the machine makes sense. What next after that?
Yeah, I think after that would be reading, which you already mentioned.
Right.
Then I would think about fixing tests. As in, okay, fixing and writing scripts could be like it could be probably in any order. But if there is something that we would want to like if something requires fixing, that's probably a nicer thing to take up first because you're probably focused on a smaller area than an entirely like a bigger chunk. So maybe that could it'll be better. Like if we have something to fix, maybe starting with that is probably could be a little simpler as well. Then I would think about writing and maintaining creating, which you've just mentioned.
So this could, yeah, maintain script was mostly on the lines of fixing, and then here writing code is like new scripts. Okay?
Should we?
And then comes the framework.
Yeah. Should we think like about individual points for each of these?
Yeah, something like okay, what are the things that we need to pay attention to while we are setting up the machine? Are there any tips and things like that?
I think okay. The first logical step for this is to get all the code in our local machine, right? So if that's I mean, whatever version control systems that we're using, probably just get it in the local machine, and then set
So
up.
even before that, understand version controlling as a concept.
Yeah, I think as a concept, yes. Maybe like at this step, it's probably not so important to look like understand it like completely. As a step to get that code in our machine, you probably need a couple of things. So at least just knowing those couple of things would help. Knowing it in depth at this point may not be required. And the reason I'm saying this is because otherwise it could just become a very daunting task, right? Like we need to know everything at start, which is which is
So at
difficult.
least get started, get the code on your machine, and then we'll think of which other commands we need to understand. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So now the code is in the machine.
Yeah, code is in the machine. Now we have to set up, right? There probably could be some scripts which we need to just run to set it up, and that's fine. The thing that I would really like at this point is also to see what are the, like, even if it's getting installed automatically, to see what are the things that are actually getting installed. So understanding what is actually being used at this time, at this step, is probably helpful. Like for example, if we just realize that we're installing or we're using Allure or something and we don't know what Allure is, so we could just look at what it is and then see, okay, it's for maybe reporting, so okay, I won't go into the depths at this point, but I know what it is used for, at least, right? Or let's say, yeah, right. Or let's say we're using OpenCV and we have absolutely no clue of OpenCV. And it's surprising that, why do we have some computer vision library? So we maybe talk to somebody and they say, hey, we're using it to, let's say, compare screenshots or something like that, right? Visual comparison, maybe. So, so at this point, when we are like setting up our machine, understanding what are the libraries or the tools that we are actually using would be helpful. At least basic understanding of why those things are used, so that could be a good start. And after you have those things set up, running the tests is like a logical next step, right? And when I say running, I would think that there are multiple aspects even to this, right? uh, okay, one thing that I would really recommend is to run it through, like, on the command line, so that we know exactly what command we are using. Oftentimes we just click on that play button on the ID, but we don't know what happens behind the scenes. So it would be good to just maybe know the exact command that we're using to run. And at this point, I guess it's also probably good to ask questions like, hey, how do we run just one single test, right? Because when we're, let's say, debugging something and we want to probably just run one, we don't want to run all the tests that are run. So thinking about those things while we are running is probably helpful. Or even thinking about how do we run this in parallel versus sequential, right? So just having those having those questions and trying to get answers to those things would be beneficial as a first step in like setting up machine and running our tests. We could also, yeah, sorry.
How about going through past reports? Someone would have already run it, right? Compare the reports and see when you run, compare the two reports and see what is the difference.
Yeah, I guess you would know what tests have been run. So maybe you would have some idea about what are the different things we are checking. Yeah, so that would help. I guess that's a good point actually. So it's probably also important to see see where these reports get generated after after we like set up our machine and run it, because we would definitely need it in to see something in the future, right? And not just reports.
That brings So that brings to a point of we need to understand the framework. Maybe a session on that in terms of like what constitutes.
That's right.
What is the folder structure? Where does reports go? Where does the script go? Where is the test data being fetched from? Right?
That could actually, yeah, I guess there is like an overlap between reading and setting up then in that case, because you would probably do a lot of this in the reading step as well. So there's of course, yeah, there's some kind of an overlap there. But I guess when we run the scripts, so okay, looking at report is one thing, and then we probably also want to see where are the logs generated. So it could be yeah, I mean, just knowing, at least knowing, where to look for logs in case we need to look for logs. So those kind of aspects probably can really go into setup. And since we're doing running of tests, we
Right.
we could even also, like, see how do we run them on, like, our CI, like, pipelines. Is it run after every app code change and test code change, or is it run like specific times of day? Whatever the strategies that we have, um, we could also just, yeah, like, at least try to understand. It could just be a session, as you mentioned, with somebody. Uh, but I guess these are some questions that we could think about at the start, just to get a broad, like, overview. Right? I guess after this step, the thing that we really probably understand is what are the different tools that are being used and why, maybe, right? And where do I find certain things, like logs or reports. So it's like a very high level overview at this point. So I guess that would probably be the uh, like the first step.
Hmm. Got it. Yeah. Next, we are now starting to read the code.
Right.
We are reading the code now.
So I guess reading automation, test automation code is very similar to reading production code. So we already, like, discussed a couple of things in one of the previous sessions, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of those principles will probably apply here as well. Like, understanding just the structure, right? Where do what things go? So just those kind of things. Of course, it could be a session given by someone, but, like, understanding those would probably be like an important part in reading code. Yeah.
Right. I think we can skip reading code for now because we've already covered something similar to that.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
then we can go to fixing and then writing code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Say now this is the first time you have got a code and then there is a bug, you are asked to fix it. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. So let's say there is an error in one particular scenario that we have, one case. Right? So now, since we already have the knowledge of running just one case from the first step, we would use that here to just run that on our machine as well. Right? Now, at this point, we could look at logs to see why it's failing. Or since we're actually running it on our machine anyway, we can see exactly what is going on. Right? And maybe I can give you a couple of examples of why it could fail. Let's say the locator changed. It's a UI test, and the locator changed. So yeah, I mean, that failure is expected to happen. So for us, the next step would be, okay, look at the place where this locator is actually mentioned, and update it. Or another thing could be, it is failing because of timing issue. So it failed on our CI, and that's why we started looking at it. But on the local machine, it's passing. Okay, so that could be something like a timing issue, or something like that. So that would need a little more debugging. So that could mean, um, yeah, I mean, logs are one thing. Attaching debugger and trying to analyze a little more is another thing. So those are probably a couple of things that we could look at. And at this phase, like, maybe since it could be the first time we're approaching it, even if we have an opportunity to pair program or something like that, I guess it will help, because then we uh, understand how somebody else also approaches problems like these. So that could help. um, and let's say now we've figured out what change needs to happen, and we have made the change. After making the change, now we need to understand what we as a team have decided on. Let's say our pushing to remote strategy. So is it like, oh, we're going to create a branch and push it? Is it just somebody walks over and looks at the code and says okay, and then you push to master? Whatever our strategy is, so at this point we would need to understand that. So which means, yeah, which means we would need to know more about how we work on the project, and a couple of more things related to our version control system. So at the start, we just maybe saw how to pull code and just then we set up. But at this yeah at this point we would need to have those additional to know additional commands. So I guess that would be required, and yeah, that's probably the aspect of that comes in fixing.
Right.
Actually, I guess quite a few of these could also go in parallel with writing scripts. Um, so so now let's say if we didn't have a chance to if there was no failing script at that point, and we started with writing, for example, then it would be like in this writing phase where we would probably need to understand these other like fixing, pushing, whatever strategies. So there is an overlap here. Now, in the writing new script phase, I guess let's say we take a particular scenario, and we want to like add some checks for it. I guess starting off with maybe discussing what we would really be checking could help, because even if it's just one single flow, there are a whole bunch of things that you can check. Is it really important? Is it required to be checked? Maybe those kind of discussions could help us understand this. Just have a plan and be able to focus on the important aspects. So maybe we could start with like discussions, and it would also.
Also thinking of the pyramid here. Like,
Yes.
is this the right layer to automate for this particular script, or it can go in some other way?
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah. So yes, that those kind of discussions would probably happen here. Those kind of thoughts, spending time in those thoughts will happen. Um, I think
you also mentioned about having the checklist or the standards within the team in terms of 2 tabs or 4 tabs.
Yes.
Right. All of that, I think, if I don't understand what's being followed in my team, then I might be the outliers.
Right.
Understanding how they code my team members, so that then I can adhere to those checklists.
Yes, great point. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So now we have found out what to do. We have agreed upon what to do. We are doing it the way the team does.
Yeah.
What else?
I think when we write code, there are a couple of other aspects like write checks. There are a couple of other aspects to think about. Um, so let's take a make my trip example for it. Just to think of something. Right? Let's say we are searching for a hotel. Then we select one hotel, and then we add in like the person details, and then we check out. Right now, let's say that we already have a check in place which is searching. So entering all those number of rooms, number of people, city, whatever, and searching, and then verifying search results. Let's say we already have that check. So now, if we want to check if let's say the details that have been entered by the person are actually shown in that checkout page, maybe there is no need to do these initial few steps, right? Like of searching a hotel and selecting a hotel, right? Maybe that's not required. Yeah.
So use the existing code which is already there, which does the same stuff.
Correct. So there are two aspects. One is reusing existing code. The other aspect is also, can we have, I think it's called seams, the word, but it basically means can we have some shortcuts in place. So let's say that seams, SEAM, SEAM.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does it expand to?
Oh, I don't think it expands. I think it's just, yeah, I think so. We can check. But it's basically, yeah, can we have some shortcuts to just get to a point where we actually want to check something? So in this case, right, for example, what we could do is instead of going through the UI completely to for searching and then selecting a hotel and then adding details, we could just maybe directly go to that URL which is about adding details, and maybe somehow set the state so that the correct hotel is selected.
Okay.
That could
This
be.
is different from, sorry, this is different from mock because it's not exactly providing a data, but it is a way to get to the end state without crossing the steps.
Yes, yes. So it could be something just in our test environment, some APIs which are exposed, so that we could, just use those APIs and get to a particular state. Like for example, another example that I can think of. So in this case, it could be as simple as just going to a particular URL. But another example for that I can think of is, let's say that we have some site where we could have where if we are a premium user, we can play some videos. Yeah. So now, how does a user become premium? Well, on the UI, there is some option, and then they select that, and yeah, maybe make a payment, or just provide email address, and then they become a premium user, and then they can play some premium video. So that's the way it happens from the UI. And maybe, like, there could be multiple things that we want to check as a premium user in our tests. So every
Right.
time doing this, going to that place and then signing up and then selecting that premium package, instead of doing that for each and every step, we could just have an API exposed only in our test environment, for example, where we could just uh, set that this particular user is now a premium user. And with that, we can directly just play the premium video. Like in our test, on from the UI, we could just play the premium video and do our checks. We don't need to follow, have these 10 additional steps of going to some page, then selecting that offer and signing up, and all those different things. So why this would help is, I guess we spoke a little about flakiness earlier. Like having too many things from doing that from the UI could add that flakiness. It also adds a lot of time, right? Like one single API call is way faster than having to click 10 different things from the UI. So, so thinking about these different shortcuts would definitely help. So, I mean, maybe at the start we don't have that, setting your premium sort of thing API, but we could speak to somebody like some developers and tell them that, hey, you know what, it'll give us benefits. So can you help us with that? So we could, yeah, think of these kind of shortcuts as well when we start writing tests. I guess, and then when you actually code, we've probably spoken about this before, but we should think about readability, and we should think about extensibility, maintainability, and all of those abilities. And I think also what I would feel is, when even if we're trying to automate a big chunk of, like a big scenario, trying to have smaller commits would help, because it's easier to understand what exactly happened. It's easier to understand the person's thought process as well, and it's also easy to revert in case we want to revert, like revert just that particular part which is not great maybe. So and that also helps us sort of think as well, like in terms of logical chunks, so that divide it logically so that we can reach our final, like, goal of adding a complete test. So that would also.
Someone else can also come and help in case. I mean, someone can pick up from where you left.
Yes.
If it is a logical piece rather than it is too much for a new person to handle.
Yes. And another example I just thought of, since I mentioned the API call for setting a premium user, right? Let's say uh, in our test, like let's say our first commit is just uh, having a provision to make that API call. Now, if we check that code in, the advantage is now there's another person who could also reuse that code to write another test which requires a premium user in parallel. While you're writing for some other case like a video play, they could write for another case, but which still needs a premium user. So that's why having like a small, dividing it smaller and pushing often maybe could also benefit, like to have things in parallel, to be able to code things in parallel.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's, I guess, a lot about writing.
Yeah, so maintaining framework and creating a framework. Maybe we should come back in the next session and then discuss about first go through the framework, how do we understand the framework, and then we can talk about maintaining and creating a framework from scratch.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we discussed about this itself, setting up the machine, how do we get rid of the different errors, understand the different errors that someone can get into. Reading code, yes, one of the sessions we covered. Fixing and writing code, similar to maintaining code. So, good points in terms of running it, checking based on the logs, reports. I just added few points here in terms of what can fail.
Yeah.
Change in a dependent code is causing an issue in your code. You rightly mentioned there's a good chance to maybe try out pair programming as well. Push strategy, I don't think many pay attention to. When you don't understand this, they might think that, okay, I've written my code, it's done. But then understanding this is also important. Then we write code. So if this is the start of scripting, then of course, some of the push strategy knowledge is definitely required. And then we might have to understand the different commands as well. And here, I mean, one word that was always ringing for me was like, okay, this is the collaboration phase. Understand, it's okay to spend more time here because if we are not automating the right thing, then it doesn't help if at the end of the day it's automated. If it is not the right thing to automate.
Yes.
Yeah, this I remember from the last time you mentioned about the different standards different teams might adopt. Good examples in terms of Make My Trip. I'll go back and check. Seam. Then the advantages of having code in smaller chunks, how it saves, and then finally, if you are writing, what do we need to pay attention to? Good. I think that way we now know at least it is not automation is not one big chunk, but then we could break it up.
Yeah.
And then maybe step by step, folks who are afraid of automation can get started and become good at it. Anything that helped you get started on these knowledge levels, or when you thought of these knowledge levels?
I think two things. Pair programming definitely helped. So in my first project, we would pair program a lot. So that definitely helped because we would pair program with an experienced person, and they just like knew a lot of things. They wouldn't at times they wouldn't just tell you answers, right? They would like you would ask a question and then they would ask a counter question. Then you would think, okay, maybe this way, but what about that? And then they would ask you more questions. And the thing that helped with that is like since you were trying to find answers while they asked questions, it got sort of stuck with me for longer instead of them just telling this is how you do it. Yeah. So so that was one thing that helped, and in general, I think exploring, right? I would try to do things, and of course, I didn't know anything at start, right? It's just it's just trying, I guess. It's not being scared, and maybe instead of, so of course if you get opportunity in your own like the projects that you're working on, it's nice, it's great, but at times there is like limited things that you can do there. There could be some constraints. So when you feel like those kind of constraints, I guess just taking something else outside of your work project and trying it there could give you more opportunities to explore on these aspects a lot more.
So somewhere where the cost of failure is not much.
Correct. It's hardly anything,
Wow.
right? You probably just I mean you're just probably doing something for fun, and and yeah, if it fails anyway, nobody's going to know because nobody's probably looking at your GitHub repo or something. So there's there's hardly any cost of failure.
More than that, I mean, in addition to that, it is more like you are the only one making that change. So you can control the variables rather than someone else change affecting your experience. Right? Yeah. Good. So this has been nice, and let's wait for the questions for the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.